friends, welcome back to my channel. I don't know about you, but I have been seeing this eyeshadow palette tag going around. I recently saw it on Hannah Louise Poston's channel, who I love so much, and I also saw it on Andrea Mattiliano's channel. I know that they're not the originators of it. I think the originator of it is Samantha March. I don't know, I don't watch her channel. But hearing the questions and thinking about my own collection, I thought it would be fun to jump on the bandwagon and share my answers with my eyeshadow palette collection. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first topic is show off your newest palette. This is a little bit of a weird one for me. A lot of them are kind of strange for me to answer in the sense that I don't have a singular one. I made a really concerted effort last year to not purchase a lot of eyeshadow palettes. My goal was to not purchase more than 2. I ended up purchasing 4, and I sincerely can't remember which one arrived last because 3 of them kind of all arrived at the same time. So I'm just gonna count them all together. So the 3 that I'm putting in under my quote-unquote newest would be my Tati Beauty Textured Neutrals Volume 1, and then I purchased around the same time, and I feel like they all kind of came at the same time, the Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star collaboration. So I have the Conspiracy palette and I have the Mini Controversy. So I would say these are my 3 newest palettes. In regards to oldest palette, I had a hard time figuring this out because when I first got really hooked onto watching YouTube and just learning and playing around with makeup, I purchased a ton of eyeshadow palettes. So I feel like I arguably could have more than one for this, but to me, the one that stands out the most as being, in my mind, the oldest is my BH Cosmetics 18 color Galaxy Chic palette. I distinctly recall wanting to purchase this palette because of an Ipsy bag. Subscription services were really like my gateway into makeup and learning more, and then also YouTube. Like those 2 things together were the perfect storm for getting me to want to buy stuff. And in an Ipsy bag, they had actually individually packaged single shadows from this palette, and I loved the shade that I have. I have no idea what I ended up doing with it. I think I probably threw it away once I got my hands on this palette. It's the only BH Cosmetics palette that I've ever purchased for my eyes, and it's relatively beaten up. It's a baked eyeshadow palette. I think it's the only baked eyeshadow palette I've ever owned. 3 of the shades that were my favorites that I used and abused, they sort of crumbled and then I dropped them one day and then they really shattered, but it's held on pretty well despite being super old. I mean, it's at least 4 years old, if not older. So I would definitely put this as my oldest palette. Next up is the most expensive palette in your collection. I actually had to go back and look up the price of some of my palettes because I sincerely couldn't remember, but in the end, the palette that I have deemed the most expensive is my Lorac Mega Pro 2 palette. This thing is $59, which is a big chunk of change for me. I've never exceeded the $60 threshold on a palette, and I don't see myself doing it very often. This was like right as I was hitting my peak of just buying and not always thinking about the things that I was purchasing or how realistic it would be for me to own all of these things. So I'm surprised I didn't blink at this. But then again, I had purchased like Too Faced palettes and Urban Decay palettes, which were typically around the $50 mark. So I kind of was comfortable with that threshold. But palettes that are like $125, I have no interest in those, like the Mothership palettes, Natasha Denona. To me, there is no palette that I need at this point, at that price point, that is worth it. I think maybe if I were just now starting with makeup, knowing all the things that I know, I might be interested in the Natasha Denona Gold palette. But aside from that, most of the releases, I see the price point and I'm like, next, like, no. To me, what's so great is the eyeshadow world is so competitive right now, and there are so many amazing formulas at so many price points that you don't have to be pigeonholed into the most expensive to get really great quality shadow and really great looks from them. So This is the most expensive one, and I'm actually a little surprised that it's that expensive. Next up is the most affordable palettes in your collection. So I have two palettes that have the exact same price point. One of them is no longer available and one of them is currently available. What's really interesting to me about what I discovered with this is that they're both collaboration palettes. In my mind, I always associate collaboration palettes on the more higher end price point, but not in this case. So the first one that I have that retails for $20 is the Ulta and Jenny Fox Miss Fabulous collaboration. This is an older palette, but not my oldest. I think what's surprising for me, especially about this palette, is that I find typically Ulta's whole cosmetics line to be a little bit pricey for what it is. For a long time, I felt that way about Sephora, but I feel like Sephora finally checked themselves and have brought their price point down for a lot of their products, not their brushes, but a lot of their products. So when I think of Ulta, I oftentimes think like overpriced, mediocre makeup. This is neither of that. It's $20 and I really like the shadows in here. Without realizing it, it was the kind of the first warm palette that I had purchased, and before I sort of knew what warm palettes were all about. I haven't gotten the most tremendous usage out of it, but every time I pulled it out and used it, I've liked the look of it. On the other end of the spectrum, same price point, it's the Emily Edit the Wants Makeup Revolution collaboration. This also retails for $20 and it's currently available. You get a ton of product in here. I don't have a lot of experience with Makeup Revolution. I didn't really have a lot of interest in the brand. There have been a couple of complexion products that I've been interested in but haven't really pulled the trigger on. But when Emily came out with this, no question in my mind. She was one of the people that I had been waiting a long time for to collaborate with. I was a little surprised that it was with Makeup Revolution. I didn't really have a handle or a thought in my mind of who I thought she would collaborate with, so I just didn't really know what to expect, but I was happy with the price point of it. I, despite some controversy, really enjoy this palette. I did think about panning it for this year and then decided not to because it's just on the lower end of the price point, so I'd rather work on something and get full use out of something that's a little bit more expensive, but this is a great palette. If you're starting out with this, I highly recommend this one. Question 5 asks about your everyday palette. This is kind of a cop-out answer for me because my everyday palette would be the two that I'm trying to pan, my Lorac Pro and my Cargo Summer in the City. So I decided to come up with a second answer, and I really thought about what's a palette that I find myself having to say, no, Victoria, don't pick that one again, like pick something else to play with. And that palette for me is the ColourPop Fame palette. I don't know what craziness took over ColourPop, but they decided to discontinue this palette last summer, and that's when I finally pulled the trigger to buy it. Last summer, I filmed eyeshadow palettes that I've like wanted for a long time but haven't actually purchased. And thanks to a lot of the feedback you guys gave me, you guys told me that this was a really good palette, and out of all the palettes I showcased in there, this got some of the highest praise. So when I saw that they were discontinuing it and they discounted the price, I pulled the trigger and I have had no regrets. I think this is a gorgeous palette. It is more cool toned, which I'm starting to find. I never really knew it, but I really am a lover of the cool tones. I love the way this looks on me. I love how easy it is to apply. Like this palette just highest praises. And I really think that if I wasn't doing a palette challenge, I would probably be pulling this out on the regular and probably would already have pan on some of these shades. Now we come to the smallest palette. This is where my mind went to a different place. When I thought of smallest palette, I didn't think about number of shades. I thought about actual grams, how much product you have in a palette. And when I thought about things in that way, I was really surprised by the answer that I came up with. And that answer, surprisingly, was this palette, the Ulta and Jenny Fox Miss Fabulous collaboration. I feel like when you look at this, you think, oh wow, is that really your smallest eyeshadow palette? There are so many shades in there. The total number of grams in this, are you ready for this, is 7.2. 7.2. My next smallest palette after that in grams was 13. Like this is so small. So then when you actually think about it in grams, a $20 price point is pretty hefty for this amount of product. So that does ring true to my initial thought of like, oh, I really find that Ulta's makeup is a little bit pricey for what it is. Now, the quality of this is better than a lot of Ulta's makeup, but still, truthfully, if I were to try to pan this, it wouldn't take me very long because I definitely can do 7.2 grams. You know, it could be a little bit harder pressed, so that might prolong it, but there's not a lot of product in here. And based on that, this is my smallest palette. On the flip side, the largest palette, I once again went by grams, and that palette is the Jaclyn Hill Morphe Original palette. There is 56 grams of product inside this palette. That is insane. Like, when I think about how it took me 2 years to pan the Lorac Mega Pro 1 palette, and I didn't even pan all the shades in there. Like, I probably kiboshed 5 of them, and it was in total a 17-gram palette, and it took me 2 years, and I think I probably was only panning, I would say maybe 14 or 15 grams. Think about how many years it would take me to pan this palette. That's freaking insane. I feel like I had heard that the Morphe palettes had a lot of product in them, but I hadn't really like dived into that and thought about it. So finding out that this has 56 grams is bananas. Now, granted, for me, when I think about using this, you guys can see that most of the bottom row I have X'd when I was testing this out. I X'd a lot of these because I have been finding that a lot of the mattes just aren't very great quality, which I've heard that about Morphe in general, that they're much more of a like shimmery formula is where they thrive. So these ones I would get rid of. I'm not sure individually what each of these shadows has in it for grams, but if I take out a lot of the ones that I probably wouldn't like and I'm left with just like the shimmery ones that I love, I'm sure I could realistically pan them, but that's a lot of product in that palette. Palette with the best memory, I'm actually going to do a repeat answer here and go with the ColourPop Fame palette. There are a number of reasons why I think I have the best memories of this. I think the first thing is this was one of the first eyeshadow palettes I purchased, and it was a really thoughtful eyeshadow palette purchase. There was no hype that I got swept up in. There was no like trigger purchasing. It was really something that I thought about. I had told myself a number of times to not purchase it, and then I finally accepted it. And when I did, and I got it and I played with it, it was so satisfying to know that this palette was worth it, that there were no regrets with it, and there's not a single shade in here that I'm like, I don't ever want to use this shade. Like, I really love everything about this palette, and there aren't a lot of palettes top to bottom that I can say that about. So I have a lot of pleasant memories with this for that reason, but this also has sort of become like a wedding palette. Ben and I, starting last year, have hit this like wave that we were saying it was gonna be like the year of weddings. We attended, I think 3 weddings in 2019, and at all of them I wore this palette. I loved it. It was so simple. I have some weddings coming up. They have been delayed because of COVID. Heartbreaking. But I do have some other weddings coming up later this summer and then also into the fall. I'll probably wear this for those because I am in one of them. So I just associate a lot of positive experiences with this palette. So I really, really love this palette. I'm very, very glad that I have it. In regards to palette worth the hype, I have 2 answers for this. I have a newer release and I have an older release. The newer release that I think is totally worth all the hype that it's received is the Tati Beauty Textured Neutrals palette. This palette, I think, had a lot of pressure to perform behind it. You know, you've got Tati, who is this self-proclaimed guru who's talked a lot about the number of eyeshadows she's tested out and played with and her expertise, and then she makes her own makeup line. So when this came out, I think that this would have been a massive nail in the coffin if it hadn't been a raging success. And it is. I mean, the shadows in here are such good quality, and they're also, I mean, as the title implies, neutrals. So I get a lot of everyday looks out of this. It also introduced me to glitters that I don't hate, glitters that work with my somewhat hooded eyes. I don't have, you know, fallout throughout the day, and that's never happened before. So the quality of this is just fantastic. I do think the sequin versus the matte rose could stand for some improvement, but like, they're still good shadows. They're just, to me, not really that different from the matte shades. And then also the packaging, the weight of this just feels like a well put together palette. The mirror on here is exceptional. Prior to getting this palette, I never really thought about mirror quality in eyeshadow palettes, but there have been so many moments where I find myself being like, God, this is a funhouse mirror compared to my Tati palette. Like, I just want to pull that out and use it because it is so large and it is so crisp, and I really appreciate that. So I feel like this palette definitely deserves all the hype, and it deserves all the praise that it has received. As far as an older palette, I would definitely say that the Lorac Pro palette was really a legendary and totally worth the hype kind of palette. I don't even know if hype was really a thing when this was hitting the market, but I just feel like this palette became such a staple, and it was showcased so much when it was around as like a good starter kit palette. And you know, when I think about the shades that are in here, this is a palette that not only is great standalone for really easy everyday looks, which I think the average makeup wearer is going for, not a lot of these avant-garde things that we see all the time on YouTube, but it also couples up really well with other palettes. Like maybe you like did go for that fun shimmery palette and now you're kind of like, can't really do a whole lot with this by itself. You bring this palette in and now it is much more likely that you'll be able to get use out of it. So I just think that this is a knockout palette. I don't think that their follow-up ones were that great, but I think the original was really fantastic, and I would probably still recommend this for people that are just getting started with eyeshadow. On the flip side, we have the question of palette that is not worth the hype. Whew, I ended up pulling 3 for this. I really couldn't pick just one, and how I came to choosing these 3 palettes was it really came down to how much use I get out of them and how many shades I actually like. And I thought about, like, if I were to go back knowing what I know about those palettes, would I have purchased them? And the answer is probably not. It's also interesting because last year I was so stringent with trimming the fat of my collection, but I think what keeps these palettes in my collection is the fact that there are maybe a handful of shades that I do use, and I just haven't maybe sat down and done some depotting. So the first one is from ColourPop. It's the Disney Designer Collection. I'm a big Disney fan, and I just was so sucked into this. Like, I think the packaging of this palette is great. I think the concept of it was a really good concept. And when I initially saw the palette, I really thought I was gonna get a lot of use out of it. I really thought, like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be great for me. But as I played with it, I have found that the top row, while good quality, nothing unique. I have all of these shades probably 2 times over in my collection, so didn't need them. Then I come down to the second row. Fairy Godmother is a heinous color on my skin tone. It doesn't read this way on my face as it does in the pan. I also don't like Thingamabob. Straight silver, I've learned, really doesn't look good with my skin tone and my hair. I don't like Beast or Midnight Curfew because they have glitter infused in them, and I am really not a fan of shades that have like a glitter underlay. I don't know why. I don't really love the way it looks. And besides, Midnight Curfew's black. How often do I wear black? Answer, never. So that's like a good number of shades I've just described to you. And then what I'm left with, like these 3 colors in this row, I have 3 times over in my collection. And then these bottom row, these are just okay. They're just okay. So, you know, you're probably thinking like, what, Victoria, why do you keep it? Well, the reason I am keeping it, and I know I can depot it, but I do love the packaging. And the shades that are in here that just aren't unique, they're not bad. They're good quality. And so I've held on to this palette simply because I can get use out of some of the shades, and I could see myself pulling this out like when I'm panning, and if all of a sudden I've panned, you know, like for example in my Lorac Pro palette, if I'm done with that taupe, I don't have anything else like that in that palette, and I might want something to supplement for that. So I could see myself coming in here and getting one of those shades and using it. I mean, it's got a cream. You guys all know I chew through creams, so I will get use out of it, but if I were to go back, I would definitely not purchase this, and I wouldn't say this is worth the hype. Other 2 palettes are from the same collection. Perhaps you know where I'm going. It's the Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star collaboration. I I genuinely did think about these before I purchased them, and originally I was just going to get the mini controversy. This palette to me seemed more up my alley. I felt like, yes, there were a couple of pops of colors in here, these two blues, like tealy, like matte blue, and then more of a royal blue, that I was like, those are kind of a stretch, but like the rest of the palette I'm gonna really like. However, I have found that, not surprisingly, I haven't really touched these two shades. They just kind of, in general, overwhelm me. But I wanted to go with this palette because these other two shades, I was like, I think I could really get into those. I really like the idea of those. Unfortunately, this beautiful, like, gray purple color doesn't really show up on my skin tone, which I'm very surprised by, like, because I'm just very pale, so I figured it would show up for me. And then controversy, this purple color really comes across as much more of a magenta color. I was recently wearing this in another video. I'll link it up here for you guys to see it in my crease. And I want this. I don't want a magenta-y color. I don't think magenta is my best color to wear on my face. So I've now eliminated half of the shades that are in here, and the other two out of the four that are left, again, are generic colors that I have a bunch of. And then these two colors are nice, but like I didn't need the whole palette for these two special colors. So in hindsight, I would not have purchased this. Now, on the flip side, I didn't intend on buying Conspiracy, but then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, like I really like a good number of shades in here. But I'm really not sure how I could have gotten that train of thought, because if we look at the 3 rows, I'm willing to bet you can already tell which row I'm never going to touch. Center row. I, aside from Conspiracy, have not touched any of these. I'm never going to touch the food videos because that's going to look heinous on me. Cheese Dust, I have orange hair, not going to play that game. Flaming Hot, also have red hair, not going to play that game. Trisha, I could see myself maybe using, I just haven't been very adventurous. And the same thing with Pigment. I could see myself using that, I just haven't. Most of my interaction has been with, are we surprised? The top row, the most neutral ones. And while I like the quality of these and I've liked the looks that I've made with these, I didn't need this whole palette for the top row. The bottom row, Sleep Paralysis, I was really into this when I was watching the series, and I do really like this as a one shadow look. I've also played a bit with Not a Fact and Illuminati, but like we know I'm not going to use my rides here. And this color, I was waiting more for the spring months to test out. Diet Cola, unlikely to be good for me because it's silver. So, I mean, arguably that's at least a third of the shades. So, didn't need this. It's not worth the hype to me. I will say if I were to go back, I definitely wouldn't get the mini. I don't know, I'm still like torn about this because I do really like the shades that are in here, but I think if I really am like hard on myself, I don't need them. So this was overhyped in my opinion. Good quality, just shade variety, not for me. Whew, we got through that one. I'm sweating a little bit. I'm sure you're gonna be like, Victoria, we knew you weren't gonna like those, but whatever. Next up is the favorite palette from favorite brand. My favorite brand is Lorac. I think that they are most represented in my collection. And when I was looking at what Lorac palettes I have remaining, I would definitely say that the Lorac Mega Pro 2 is my jam. There are a lot of lid shades in here, which I love lid shades. I can go through lid shades so quick. They're like those nice pale, really light lid shades. Oh, that's my favorite. There are a lot of cool tones in here. I'm not saying every shade is my favorite. If I were to pan this, I definitely would be saying goodbye to some of them and not pan them all together. But overall, I really like the shade range in there, and I would definitely go with this one. And then most used palette, you guys all know, it's the two that I'm panning. It is the Cargo Summer in the City and my Lorac Pro palette. Those are the two that are getting the most love this year. We will see where I end up with these. Hopefully they'll both be kaput by the end of 2020 and I'll find something new to obsess over. Alright guys, I hope you had fun hearing my answers to these questions. I would love it if you picked one or two or all of them to answer in the comments below, because there's so much variation with people's eyeshadow preferences and collections, so I would be really curious to know your thoughts and your answers. I hope that you had fun with me today, and I'll talk to you in my next video real soon. Bye!